Hello and welcome to Templar Knight TV. I'm Tony McMahon. I'm the author of the Knights Templar History and Mystery, the first part in a trilogy on the Knights Templar. I'm going to be spoiling you over the next 18 months. Another book out later this year specifically on the trials of the Knights Templar, and then next year a book out about the alleged link between Freemasonry and the Templars. Anyway, what I want to talk to you about today is this idea that there is a link between the Knights Templar and the mythical land of Atlantis, and work into that allied theories about extraterrestrials, the Templars of Aquarius, and the Victorians. The Victorians have got a lot to do with this, so let's unpack this whole idea that the Knights Templar have got something to do with Atlantis. Well, let's start with, where does the story of Atlantis come from? And the person to blame for the story of Atlantis is Plato, the great Greek philosopher. And he wrote a kind of dialogue between two fictional characters, Timaeus and Critias. Apologies for the pronunciation if some of you don't agree with that pronunciation. Not going to get stuck on that. And what basically emerges in this dialogue is a story about a land called Atlantis, which lies beyond the Pillars of Hercules, one assumes, in the Atlantic Ocean, because the Pillars of Hercules are normally taken to mean the Straits of Gibraltar. Gibraltar on the European side and Morocco on the other side. So somewhere out in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Mediterranean, beyond the known world at the time, was this civilization of Atlantis, presumably on some kind of gigantic island. And at some point, this civilization was destroyed. We're told that while Atlantis and its Atlantean inhabitants existed, that it was a hugely sophisticated, wealthy society, and that the citizens were descended from human beings and the god Poseidon. Now, initially, the people of Atlantis were morally upright, they were righteous people, good people, but their wealth and their success brought with it corruption, arrogance, hubris, and the gods didn't like that. So Zeus, the king of the gods, brought about the destruction of Atlantis in a rain of fire with earthquakes, volcanoes, and floods, and Atlantis was submerged below the waves, never to be seen again. Some scholars have linked the story of Atlantis to Egyptian records of a volcanic eruption that destroyed the island of Thera, that is modern Santorini, which is still to this day a caldera, that is the rim of a volcano. And there is certainly evidence of a civilization there that was destroyed, and it destroyed as well the Minoan civilization on Crete. So that happened around 1500 BC. Others have argued that the story represents a kind of symbolic representation of the destruction of a civilization, maybe the Achaemenid Empire, but the story is, if you want, an allegory of decline and fall. Since the 19th century, the idea has developed that Atlantis was a kind of long-lost utopia, and that the people of Atlantis, those who survived rather, spread across the face of the earth, educating and informing other civilizations, that they were, some people argue, the architects of the pyramids in ancient Egypt, that they informed the building of great wonders in the Americas by ancient peoples. The man who really expounded this theory was Ignatius Loyola Donnelly, who was a US congressman and also peddler of conspiracy theories, historian, that's what I meant to say. In the 19th century, he was the first one in a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, to articulate this view that Atlantis was a long-lost superior civilization. He said that many of the similarities we can see in different ancient civilizations around the world could be explained by this common Atlantean heritage. Another person who pushed the idea of Atlantis as our common heritage was a man called Hugh Clayton Randall Stevens. He wrote a book called Atlantis to the Latter Days. Now, he was writing in the early 20th century, the 1920s, 1930s, and he formed something called the Knights Templar of Aquarius. Randall Stevens believed that in a previous life he had been a high priest in Atlantis, and also possibly he had been the pharaoh Akhenaten in Egypt. And he said that his book was inspirationally dictated to him by, and I quote, the masters Oneferu and Adolami of the Assyrian group, whoever they are. In many ways, a very similar theory to Donnelly's. He believed that the Atlanteans had educated other civilizations, that they were behind the story of Genesis in the Old Testament, and also that they informed the secret beliefs of the Knights Templar, that they passed on a wisdom that became the core creed of the Templars. Now, Randall Stevens was both, by the way, an author and a baritone opera singer, just in case you wanted to know. So he could sing and write. And he also founded the Knights Templar of Aquarius. And for all his life, he pushed this idea that the Knights Templar were the inheritors of some knowledge from the people of Atlantis. Now, you're going to ask, did he have any evidence? Well, no, not really, but it all came to him in visions, in dreams, and so on. This is very reminiscent of the writer Madame Blavatsky, who also pushed similar theories and who also claimed that her knowledge and insights came through trance-like visions and dreams. Oh, and she also consulted shaman. I think another inspiration for a lot of this Atlantean theories in the early 20th century was the growth of science fiction. Obviously people like Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, but there was also The Last Days of Atlantis, written by Charles Lohmann and Pierre Barthélemy Guessy, and they in a fictional way put forward similar theories about Atlantis. The difference is that Randall Stevens turned it into a sort of fact. I don't want to be too sarcastic and dismissive, but to my mind, it's rather like watching Game of Thrones and then deciding that Westeros actually existed and then developing a whole creed around the idea of the Westerosians imparting wisdom after the destruction of Westeros by Daenerys Targaryen's dragons, something like that. You get my drift. It'll come as no surprise to those of us who are interested, fascinated by the 1970s, I certainly am, that the Knights Templar of Aquarius enjoyed something of a surge in interest in the 1970s. On one occasion, they stood on a hill in London trying to beckon down an extraterrestrial craft they claimed was hovering overhead. In fact, according to one newspaper report at the time, they claimed to be able to engage in telepathic conversations with extraterrestrials flying overhead. You might be asking, why are the Knights Templar of Aquarius called the Knights Templar of Aquarius? And this hinges on the whole idea of the age of Aquarius being an age of enlightenment and wisdom that is coming for all humanity. And so the Templars, the wisdom that they acquired from the Atlanteans, will soon become something they can impart to all of us for the benefit of humanity. Well, we could certainly do with it right now. As you can probably guess, I don't have a lot of truck with this idea of the Knights Templar having a secret creed that was imparted to them by the survivors of Atlantis. But the theory is out there. Be aware that it's out there. I haven't gone into the fact that this whole link between the Templars and Atlantis is also something, I'm afraid to say, the Nazis lighted on as part of their Aryan race theory. I'll keep that for another vlog, but though you can read about that on my blog, my text-based blog, thetemplarknight.com. In the meantime, if you've got anything to say about this, do share it below. Maybe you do think the Templars were the inheritors of great wisdom from Atlantis. And if you'd like a more, should we say, mainstream version of Templar history, then do get hold of my book, The Knights Templar History and Mystery. I give you the mainstream history and I do touch on some of the mysteries and conspiracy theories. It's a damn good read if I don't say so myself. I look forward to seeing you again soon. In the meantime, non nobis domine.